to Tennessee's at-home learning series for literacy. Today's lesson is for all of our fifth graders out there, though everyone is welcome to tune in. This lesson is the fourth in this week's series. My name is Ms. Thompson, and I'm a fifth grade teacher at Tennessee Schools. I'm excited to be your teacher for this lesson. Welcome to my virtual classroom. If you didn't see any of our previous lessons, you can find them on the following website, www.tn.gov/education. You can still tune into today's lesson, even if you haven't seen the other ones. Today, we'll be learning about someone that changed the history of human communication. But before we get started and to participate fully in today's lesson, here's the things you'll need. 2 pieces of paper, something to write with, and something to write on. You can choose to get a highlighter or a pen if you have one around. If not, a pencil will be just fine. And I'll give you a few minutes to get your supplies ready. Let's begin. I bet you never thought you'd count down the minutes until you got to learn more about electricity. Well, here we are, and I'm just as excited. And of course, we have to add more to everything we've already learned about the exciting history of electricity, the scientists and the inventors that have paved the way, and just how much our lives are impacted by it each and every single day. We've had some great fun starting in each of our previous lessons, and today is going to be no exception. I've had you count a lot. First, you counted all the things in your home that were plugged into an outlet or used batteries to work at the beginning of our first lesson. And then the last lesson, I had you count all the light bulbs in your home. So I bet you're thinking we're probably going to count again. Well, you're correct. Let's do it. Grab a piece of paper and something to write with, quickly. Okay, I'm going to say one word, just one. And when I say it, be ready to start writing. Are you ready? You're going to write down everything you can think of in both school and home that is wireless. I'm going to repeat it. You're going to write down everything that you can think of in school or your home that is wireless. Are you ready? Go. All right, I have a list. I hope you do too. I can't think of any more, but I can probably think of some more wireless things that I need to add to my list. What did you come up with at home? Anything that's wireless? How many did you get? Was it a lot? I'm sure it was. I'm going to share my list with you. TV remote, wireless. Our remotes don't have wires to them, do they? Now, also I got cell phone, wireless headphones, laptop, and my computer mouse. Now, what does it mean? It means that they might use batteries or plug into their source of electricity, but they can also send signals to other electronic things wirelessly. Did you get some of the same things that I got? Did you get anything different? Keep that list close by. You're going to want to use it later on. Before we really dig into today's lesson, I want to check in on what we learned about in our last lesson. And I'm especially excited to hear about your newspaper story on Thomas Edison and his new light bulb invention. Was it a total hit? What did everybody think about all the details you were able to provide since you were actually there in his laboratory at Menlo Park? Not to mention, you even grabbed a couple of quotes from the man himself. Please make sure to save me a copy so I can sit down one morning soon and give it a good read. Of course, while I sip a cup of hot coffee. Speaking of lamplight, in our last lesson, we found out that the journey to electrical light was so interesting. Like Alexander Graham Bell, Thomas Edison was not the best student in school, but he had a great sense of curiosity. This curiosity led him to experiment and make improvements to Bell's telegraph. Do you remember what the telegraph did? Great memory. A telegraph was a machine that could send messages across wires. Do you remember how Edison improved Bell's telegraph? Correct. Edison's telegraph could send up to 4 messages at once. And at that time in history, remember, this was the late 1800s, that was quite an amazing feat. During his years at Menlo Park Research Laboratory, Edison and his team even made the first recording of a human voice with a machine called a phonograph. But neither of these inventions are what Edison is really famous for. Do you remember what he's famous for? Yes, Thomas Edison and his team discovered that electric light was possible. In 1879, they got a light bulb to burn for the whole day, then longer and longer and longer. Soon, homes and businesses everywhere wanted to trade out their gas lamp lighting for electric lighting. Light bulbs were the wave of the future, and they're still around us today. So let's take a moment to think back to all that we learned about this specific time in history, the electrical age, particularly the scientists that were inventing things to make people's lives better. Alexander Graham Bell, inventor of the telephone, and Thomas Edison, inventor of the light bulb, were just two of the great minds at this time. Go ahead and grab your organizer from our first lesson on electricity. The one with the word electricity really, really big in the middle. I'll give you a moment to find yours while I find mine. Here's mine. Do you have yours? Great. Now let's see. We've used the name of three really important inventors right here to dive deeper and learn more about how our lives have been changed by the things they developed so long ago. 1, 2, 3. So I'm thinking we can move on to the next inventor in line. Guglielmo Marconi. That is a really hard name to say. I see that we wrote down that he created wireless sound. Does everybody see that on your graphic organizer? Wow. Didn't we just make a list of everything in our school and home that works wirelessly? We sure did. But in 1875, Alexander Graham Bell had developed a way for people to communicate across long distances. However, at this time, it was only possible across wires. So this really has me wondering, what drove Marconi to invent something like wireless communication? Well, he must have had experiences along the way that influenced him to keep trying, but what were they? Likewise, were there other inventors that inspired him? Okay, now I'm really curious and ready to head into today's text to find out what was so cool about this Marconi guy. I want to know how he developed a way for people to communicate wirelessly. I want you to listen closely as I read. I wonder if we'll find any evidence that Marconi's life was anything like Bell's or Edison's. Let's get going. Guglielmo Marconi, 1874 to 1937. Let's take a look at a picture of Mr. Marconi. Here he is as a young man. Guglielmo Marconi was born in the city of Bologna, Italy, on April 25, 1874. His mother, Annie, was Irish, and his father, Giuseppe, was Italian. Giuseppe Marconi was a very wealthy man. When Marconi was very young, his mother took him and his brother, Alfonso, to southern Italy during the winter. There, he learned to love the sea. This is a very interesting start. Marconi was born 30 years after Bell and Edison. I wonder if this is a time of invention, particularly inventions involving electricity. We also read that Marconi was born into a wealthy family. Do you think this would be an advantage for him later in life when he begins to experiment and invent? How do you think that would be an advantage for him? I'm thinking that being an inventor could get pretty expensive with all those gadgets and chemicals. Having the money to support all your inventions would sure be nice. What do you think it means that Marconi learned to love the sea? What do you think that means? I think it means that he enjoyed the sea, the water, and the sounds of the waves, and he just liked to be there. I know I love to be there. Tutors taught Marconi and his brother, but the young Marconi did not like to do schoolwork. He preferred to pursue his own interests instead. At the age of 12, he was sent to school in Florence, Italy. He was serious and very shy, and his teachers were often frustrated with his lack of interest in his studies. Wait a second. This reminds me of someone. Who does it remind you of? Me too. Now we know that Bell, Edison, and Marconi did not like school. Isn't that interesting? I'm happy to know that these days the curiosity that drove the three of them is valued in school. You're right. This looks like a perfect time to start our organizer. We've already learned some really good information about Marconi, and I don't want to get too far along and forget it. And remember, the past few lessons, we have talked about organizing our thoughts on a piece of paper to keep everything together so you can do your independent practice at the end. Now, I'm going to create a graphic organizer, and I would like you to do the same. I'm going to write down Marconi really big right here in the middle. Now, where am I going to start? I think I'm going to start down where we're going to write down the year of his birth and the year of his death. Let's do that together. 1874 to 1937. He was 63 years old. Go ahead and write that down. I will zoom in for you. Now, I think it's also interesting that we know that he was born 30 years after Bell and Edison. I think that's going to help us learn a little bit about his life. So I'm going to go ahead and write that 30 years after Bell and Edison. I hope your organizer looks like mine. Now, I want to also add a few more other things that I learned once I was reading. He loved the sea. We know that for sure. And he also did not love school. Let's go ahead and add that into our organizer. He loved the sea, but did not love school. He loved the sea, but did not love school. Remember, I'm keeping all my thoughts organized on my graphic organizer, so it'll help me with my independent practice at the end of our lesson. In his free time, Marconi devoured books about science. He liked to tinker with wires and batteries and take things apart and put them back together. His father thought he was wasting time, but guess who supported his interest? That's right, his mother. This says that Marconi devoured books about science during his free time. What do you think that means? What does it mean to devour books about science? I'll give you a few seconds. What does it mean to devour books about science? Correct. The word devoured means to consume as much as possible. So I'm thinking that this means Marconi simply couldn't get enough information about science. Could this be a clue about Marconi's future interests? I think so. I think we might have read about another clue in this section. Do you know what it is? Yes, Marconi liked to tinker with wires and batteries. Electricity. Like Bell and Edison, he liked to take things apart and put them back together. He was finding a way to nurture his curious nature. Why do you think Marconi's father thought his interest in science was a waste of time? Maybe, but I think we're going to have to read a little bit more. At this point, it seems like his father doesn't really value science, or at least tinkering around and experimenting. Who did we find out does support him? Yes, his mother. Let's take a look at a picture of Marconi as a child. Here he is pictured with his mother. Much to his father's disappointment, Marconi began attending the Leghorn Technical Institute in 1887. Giuseppe Marconi had hoped that his son would attend the Naval Institute to become a naval officer. At Leghorn, a change took place in Marconi. He actually began to enjoy his schoolwork. He was able to study science. One of his interests was, you guessed it, electricity. It sounds like Marconi's father wasn't the most supportive and had other plans for him. However, we see at age 13, Marconi ended up attending school at Leghorn Technical Institute. Let me reread this. At Leghorn, a change took place in Marconi. He began to enjoy his schoolwork. Why do you think he started to enjoy school? Yes, I think you're right. We read that at Leghorn he was able to study what? Yes, science. He was finally given the chance to study something that he really, really enjoyed. But even better, he now had time to devote one of his favorite interests, electricity. Let's get back to the text. At 18 years old, Marconi hoped to go to the University of Bologna. Unfortunately, he did not get in. His mother convinced his physics professor there to allow her son to use a university library with access to the university's books. Marconi began to focus on the idea of creating a worldwide communication system. Wow. A kid this smart doesn't get into college? That's so interesting. But thank heavens for his mother. What did she get him access to? Yep, the library. This way Marconi could have access to all the books about science that he could ever want. Before we move on, let's back it up for just a second and talk about the word physics. We read that Marconi's mother convinced a physics professor to give her son access to the university library. Well, this professor or college teacher must have had some sort of connection to Marconi's interest in science and electricity. What kind of professor do you think he might have been? I think so too, a professor of science. So, physics is a specific type of science. Let's write that word down on our organizer, and I'll give you a really good definition so you can use to remember what it means. So we're going to add physics into our graphic organizer, and then I'm going to give you a definition to help you understand what it means. Go ahead and write down physics now. And now I'm going to give you a definition for it. A type of science that studies matter, energy, and electricity. A type of science that studies matter, energy, and electricity. I'll give you just a few seconds to write that down. If you need to pause, you may, to get it written down. Physics, a type of science that studies matter, energy, and electricity. But hold on, we read that with access to the university library, Marconi could now focus on the idea of creating a worldwide communication system. What do you think that means? Right, like Bell and Edison, Marconi had an idea that he wanted to chase. And like Bell and Edison, Marconi was also intrigued by the idea of communication. For Marconi, he wanted to develop a system for people to be able to communicate all across the world, across lands and across oceans. How cool is that? Let's add that to our organizer. I'm going to write the idea. I'm going to write the word idea in all capital letters. And then I'm going to say that his idea was to create a worldwide communication system. So I'm going to write the word idea in all caps. And then I'm going to write that his idea was to create a worldwide communication system. And all great things start out as what? Ideas. His idea, create a worldwide communication system. I am dying to know. Do you think Marconi is going to be able to create a whole system that allows people to communicate from all across the world? Let's find out. Wireless communication. Marconi became extremely interested in telegraphic communication. Telegraphic wires had been strung up all over the United States and Europe. Okay, we've been talking a lot about the telegraph, and here we see that Marconi was really into learning more about telegraphic communication, or how people use telegraphs to communicate. Remember, Marconi was born 30 years after Bell and Edison, so the telegraph wasn't really a new thing anymore. People were used to receiving messages through the telegraphs. What do you think that might have looked like? Wires everywhere, strung from here to there. Do you want to see a picture? Look at this. Wow. Here we can see the telegraphic communication was so popular that wires have been strung up all over the place. Can you believe how many wires there are? That's a lot. Do you think all these wires got in the way? I'm thinking they did. Do you think anyone would do anything about it? Let's find out. Marconi wondered if it would be possible to communicate over long distances without all these wires. During this time, he learned as much as possible about telegraphs, including Morse code. So, what did Marconi wonder? Yes, he wondered if communication without wires was possible, and his curiosity was on a roll. Before we move on, I want to fill your brain with some really neat information from something we just read. We haven't had a chance to talk much about the code that was used by telegraph operators. They used Morse code, which was a series of dots and dashes that represented letters in our alphabet. The operator on the sending end would tap, tap, tap out the messages in code, and then it would travel across the wires to an operator at the receiving end. That operator would translate the dots and dashes into words that made up the message. Here is a picture that shows you the dots and dashes that make up Morse code. Isn't this neat? See how the letter A is represented with a dot and a dash? Marconi believed that he would need to know as much as possible about the telegraphic communication system. Okay, so Marconi was thinking to himself, enough with these wires. Let's see if we can do the same thing without them. I believe this definitely belongs in our organizer. Let's add that Marconi wanted to see if people could communicate long distances without wires. Telegraphic communication, but without wires. Let's add it. He wanted to do telegraphic communication without wires. One thing that caught Marconi's attention was the idea of electromagnetic waves. Though the idea itself was not really new, the possibility of using these waves to communicate was. Ooh, that's a cool word. Look closer at that word, electromagnetic wave. Well, we all know what a wave is. That's simple. But electromagnetic wave? What two words do you see represented in electromagnetic? Yes, electric and magnetic. So this is some sort of wave that is both electric and magnetic. This word is way too cool. Let's add it to our organizer. I'm going to write electromagnetic wave right under the words we wrote earlier, telegraphic communication. I'm going to write electromagnetic waves right under here. I'd like for us to take a side road just a moment and investigate these electromagnetic waves once we write our word down. Wow, my graphic organizer is getting really full. I don't know about y'all. Since Marconi is so interested in them, did you know, since he's so interested in them, I really want to know more about their discovery. Did you know that in the mid-1800s, a scientist named James Clerk Maxwell discovered that magnetic force moved in waves, like the waves that move through the water? Can you make a wave with your hand? Everybody knows how to do that. However, unlike water waves, magnetic waves could travel through empty space. He suggested that since electricity and magnetism were related, electricity might be made to travel in waves too. The secret was to create a wave that was electric and magnetic, an electromagnetic wave. One way to do it was to switch an electric current back and forth very quickly, and this would essentially make the wave. So, even though the idea of electromagnetic waves was not new, Marconi wanted to see if he could do something new with them. He wanted to build upon someone else's discovery. What was it, though? Yes, no one had ever tried to see if they could use electromagnetic waves to communicate. And yes, Marconi wanted to be the first to make it happen. Marconi began to wonder whether electromagnetic waves could be used to carry messages as a telegraph did, but without wires. Although his professor at his college was not impressed by the idea, Marconi was not discouraged. He was fascinated by the idea of wireless communication. Scientists had already proved that electromagnetic waves could travel very short distances. Marconi set out to get the waves to travel much longer distances, even across the oceans. So, like other inventors before him, Marconi planned to take someone else's idea and build upon it. What did he want to try? That's right. He wanted to try to see if he could get the electromagnetic waves to travel farther. He wanted them to travel much longer distances. With his mother's help, he set up a laboratory in the attic of his parents' house. His father reluctantly provided money for the equipment. Marconi's dad still isn't too excited, is he? But he handed over some money and then in swoops Mom to help. What did she do to help him? Yep, she helped him set up a lab in the attic of their home. How cool is that? So, does this remind you of anyone else we've talked about recently? I think so. Really good memory if you said Thomas Edison, because remember, Thomas Edison had a cool laboratory in Menlo Park, New Jersey. It was big enough for him and his team to experiment like crazy. I wonder what Marconi's attic laboratory looked like. Do you want to see? Let's look at a picture of his laboratory. Wow. They are really different. Marconi's laboratory is much more simple than Edison's. I guess he was trying to figure things out and working with what he had available. All right, we'll have to pump the brakes right here. This is a perfect place to stop our reading today. And since Marconi finally has his own laboratory, watch out world. Who knows what's going to happen? Let's take a few minutes, put our brains together, and get you ready for your independent practice at home. I want you to do me a favor. Look over your notes in your organizer. I have my organizer here. I see that Marconi was born 30 years later than Alexander Graham Bell and Thomas Edison. I see that he loved the sea, but he did not love school. But loving the sea would be important work later in his life. I also noticed that they didn't like school, but he did like science and the study of physics. We found out that Marconi did not get into college, but due to the kindness of a physics professor there, he had access to all the library books. We see that the telegraph was also an important device for Marconi, but his idea was to create a worldwide communication system. He wanted to explore the use of electromagnetic waves as a way to send wireless messages. And he did. First in his attic laboratory, and then eventually miles away. Like both Alexander Graham Bell and Thomas Edison, Marconi's life was very interesting, full of challenges and lots of hard work. He was a very curious child, but set his mind to something and didn't give up. He even liked building upon the ideas of others to make something even better. Let's take some time to think about the early path that was being set before Marconi. Grab a piece of paper. I want you to write down your thoughts as I ask you just a few guiding questions. 1. What do you think were Marconi's earliest influences? In other words, what were the things in his childhood that may have driven him in life to have a love of experimentation and invention? I'm going to ask another one. What were some of the challenges that he faced along the way? And how did he navigate those challenges? How did he believe these challenges would shape what he would do next? I'll give you a few minutes to go back and look over your answers before moving on. Now, I'd like for us to make sure we have everything we need to do for our independent practice. We just created a really good review of our organizer notes. Another great job capturing so much information about Mr. Marconi. We also just took some time to think really deeply about Marconi's early life and is shaping up to lead a life of discovery and invention. I think you're ready. After our lesson is over today, I want you to take some time to complete another cool activity. I'm going to set up a really fun scenario for you. You can read along here with me if you would like. I'll zoom in just a bit. Imagine you are a 20-year-old Marconi. Since you were young, you have immersed yourself in everything science. You read books about science, you tinker with things and put them back together and take them apart. You even know all about the famous inventions that inspire your curiosity, like Mr. Bell's telegraph. Just 2 years ago, you had a wonderful idea to create a worldwide communication system. As you work toward making your idea a reality, you have been focused on electromagnetic waves. Although scientists have been able to prove that electromagnetic waves can travel a very short distance, you're convinced that they can travel much, much further. Not to mention, you believe electronic waves are the key to sending messages far distances and sending them wirelessly. Third paragraph. However, you don't have a good place to continue your research and experimentation. You need a laboratory. Your mother agrees and says you can use the attic, but warns you that your father will not likely support your new endeavor. She suggests you write him a letter and leave it on his desk, convincing him that your lab could lead to an amazing invention. You agree and get started on writing the letter. Here's your task. Use a clean piece of paper to write your very convincing letter. Don't forget to reference your organizer to help you. Be sure to include 1, why you really need a laboratory to continue your work. 2, how close you are to making an important discovery that electromagnetic waves can travel much further than anyone knows. And 3, what you already know about electromagnetic, how they work, and why you believe they're the key to sending messages far distances wirelessly. So again, this is your task. You're writing a convincing letter about why you should get a laboratory in your house. I know that you're going to be able to convince him. And when you do, I'll be sure to swing by and check out that laboratory. As always, I enjoyed learning with you today, and I'm glad we know a little bit more about Mr. Marconi. Thank you, as always, for inviting me into your home. I look forward to seeing you on the next lesson at Tennessee's At Home Learning Series. Bye.